My name's Lara. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us tonight. I'm the Education and Outreach Director here at MSHS, and I'm joined online tonight by my friend and colleague, Courtney Tchida. Hey, Courtney. I noticed that most people that are here tonight are members of MSHS, but if you're not, please check out our membership offers. We have a great offer. What are we calling it, Courtney? 22
one new and 22.
One new and 22. So it's $5 off membership. And your membership dollars go to help support our signature programs like Garden in a Box and Minnesota Green. And with membership, you get the Northern Gardener magazine 6 times a year, and discounts at local nurseries, discounts on classes, free tickets to the Home and Garden Show. So it's a pretty great membership. So check it out. So now, welcome Courtney Tchida. Courtney is the Community Programs Director at MSHS. She has over 20 years of experience working in horticulture and food systems education. She's 16 years at the U of M managing the Cornucopia Student Organic Farm. She has experience growing a wide variety of edible crops, planning and implementing gardens for schools, farms, and food shelf gardens. And that's how I met you, Courtney, is by taking one of your awesome classes. So thanks for being here, Courtney, and take it away.
Thanks, Lara. This is fun and exciting. We've been sort of threatening to do this Gardening 101 talk for a couple of years, and I'm excited that it's finally here and we get to pilot it tonight. So let's get going.
Me too.
So first thing before you dig in is to think about the sun and what you have in your landscape. So many plants love to bask in full sun, while others thrive in more shadier spots. And some require a bit of both. So it's a good idea to just go out and, check out the spot that you're thinking about for a garden. How much direct sunlight is it? And not all sunshine is really equal. So the most intense hours of sunlight are between the hours of 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. And gardens in direct sun during those 4 hours will make a great spot for plants that are going to thrive in full sun. So here's kind of the breakdown of full sun, part shade, and then full shade. So keep that in mind as you're planning your garden. Plants for full sun include things like catmint and coneflower, liatris, rudbeckia, salvia, sedum, shasta daisies. Our tomatoes and cucumbers really thrive in full sun. And then there's some fun annuals as well. The picture there is of the Mexican sunflower, and that's one I really love. It just is a great attractant for butterflies in your garden. So check that out. For shade, there's other plants that do better, things like astilbe, bleeding hearts, hostas, turtleheads are the perennials, and we'll talk about what perennials are in just a second. Veggies, things like broccoli, peas, radishes, beets, turnips, and carrots, and I have more info on shady veggies coming up in a bit. And then there's a bunch of annuals that will do well in shade as well. Tarina is that picture, that blue flower there in the middle. It's also called monkey flower, and it just has a fun, I don't know, it looks like little mouths opening up. It's kind of a fun one. The other thing that you really want to consider before you dig in is the kind of soil conditions. So whether you have soil that is thick, wet clay, or dry and sandy, the solution is almost always adding compost. It introduces important nutrients and improves the soil structure, helping sandy soil to retain water and breaking up clay so water will flow and your roots can grow. So the kind of two key terms here are amend, which is you're adding organic matter to the soil. Typically compost is one of the easiest things to add. And then compost itself, that's organic matter that is made up of decomposed plant material, or it could be a mixture of plant material and animal manure, but you're adding that to the soil to replenish the nutrients that the plants are using. So then the next step is really to plan the garden. So the idea is to just dream big. Think about, how do I want to use this space? How do I want the space to feel? And there's all kinds of fun inspiration all around. Check out the books and magazines at your local bookshop, scroll through Pinterest and Instagram, and bookmark any outdoor space spaces, plants, tips, and trends that catch your eye. And if you have gardening neighbors, ask what they're growing. It's a great way to get ideas. And you might have, already seen something that you really like and want to include that. The next step is to put your ideas on paper. Here, there's really no, fancy things that are required. You really just need pen and paper. You want to start by mapping out where those sunny spots are, where those shady spots are, add in where, structures are, things like your house, your driveway, your paths, things like that. Note any wet or dry areas, and be sure to save spots for the plants that you love or have always wanted to try. And while you're doing that, start a garden journal. That's a really great way to keep track of what worked and what didn't work, what you liked and what you didn't like, so that you can, keep planning each year and you don't have to start all over again. Next step is to start with the big stuff. So think about, where the patios are, the pathways, boulders, fences, any trees that are existing or shrubs, or trees and shrubs that you want to add. And then you want to mix in annuals and perennial flowers. They're smaller and easier to weave around larger design elements. And you also want to think about, the practical considerations of, water flow or traffic patterns or light, wind, wildlife, neighbors, things like that. The next step as you're planning is to think about clusters of plants in odd numbers. So grouping things in 3, 5, 7 or more plants can really pack a powerful punch. A bed of zinnias creates a sea of summer color and attracts more bees than a lone plant ever could. That said, try incorporating a few standalone specimens as well, like a single tree or a single really showy shrub as a focal point. And oftentimes when we're thinking about planning our garden, we often will, do that while we're standing outside, but go inside and look out your windows, because those are the views that you're going to have for, part of the time as well. So think about how the garden's going to look from inside your house, and make sure that you drop in some of your favorite plants within your daily sight lines. I have a plum tree outside my kitchen window, and I love being able to watch it throughout the season, watching the plums ripen, making sure that the squirrels aren't getting them as they ripen. And it's just a fun way to interact with the garden. Another thing to think about when you're planning is foliage first. So flowers often steal the show, but supporting a cast of leaves and stems are just important. Choosing a variety of leaf shapes and textures and colors to light up the gardens when the blooms inevitably fade is really important. It's also important to think about incorporating veggies. Kale and chard are both delicious and beautiful in gardens, and can add that leafy element to your garden and be edible as well. Timing it right is also another important thing to think about with garden planning. Spring and early summer plants will look great when you're shopping, but choose some that will bloom in July and August and September too. Evergreens, colorful stems, and bright berries help spruce up winter gardens too. And so those are the kind of things that you need to think about when you're planning your garden. So annuals and perennials, what do I mean when I say that? So an annual is a plant that completes its life cycle in a year or less. So they require replanting every year. Sometimes they will reseed, which means that the seeds that they dropped the previous year will come back up the next spring. But for the most part, they have to be planted every year. And they're going to usually bloom profusely throughout the whole summer. Perennials, these are plants that live for 2 or more years outside in the ground. The foliage usually dies back each winter, and the plants send up new shoots from the same root systems in the spring. There are also biennials, but that's complicating things, so we're not even going to worry about that right now. Perennials tend to be a lot less work because they're going to be there for the long term. There are also bulbs that can be planted and come back every year, or they may need to be dug up in the fall as well. But that gives you an idea of annuals and perennials and what that means. And what's important to know too is also the hardiness zone. So in Minnesota, we range from 3A to 5A. And knowing where a plant is hardy to tells you if it's going to survive here or not. So something like a marigold may be a perennial in Florida, but it is not a perennial here. And so everywhere, every plant has its sort of native habitat and range of where it will, grow throughout the whole year. But a lot of these up here in our cold climate, it's important to think about what's going to actually survive here. So keep that in mind. So now that you've thought about your planning and your prep, that means it's time to plant. When to plant can depend on the weather, the soil temperature, and specific plant requirements. Some plants can tolerate cooler temperatures and be planted earlier in the season. Think about pansies or kale, dianthus, violas, peas, radishes, sweet alyssum. And don't plant everything in one session. Spread it out. You want to plant some hardy annuals in the early spring, direct sow some seeds once the chance of frost has passed, sprinkle in perennials and herbs, and more annuals for color throughout the season. Part of the great thing about gardening is being outside, so spread out that planting throughout the season, and you'll enjoy it even more. This is a really great resource that we have on our resource hub. That is the Northern Gardener Guide for Zone 4. You can check this out on our website, and it gives you an idea of when to start the seeds indoors, when to plant them or transplant them outside, or directly sow them, and we'll talk about that term in just a second, and when to harvest them as well. So these are all veggie crops, and it's a great resource for you that's available. Now, there are cool season crops and warm season crops. So cool season crops are things that can be planted early in the spring, and they're going to withstand our cold temperatures. Things like, they can even tolerate a little bit of a frost, or even if it snows again later, they will be just fine. And they usually germinate earlier in the season than the warm season crops. Warm season crops, typically, they will not survive any kind of frost or snow. So it's better to wait and plant those until usually late May or even beginning of June. I like to wait till June 1st to plant my tomatoes and peppers and eggplants, because I find that when I plant them earlier, they may survive, but they're going to kind of just sit there and be sad for the first 2 weeks after Memorial Day or after Mother's Day. That's kind of May 15th is really when our last frost-free date usually is. So cool season crops can be planted before that, warm season crops after that, but again, I like to wait till around June 1st. Thinking about where to plant things, you want to make sure that plants have enough room. Like, they're tiny when they start out, but they're going to get bigger. So it's really important to think about, how much space they're going to need and to not overcrowd. It's really, really hard because at the beginning of the season, there's so much space and there's so little. But it's really important to make sure that each plant is going to have enough room. I like to tell a story of like the time when I first started growing a lot of different veggies, and I grew some squashes and pumpkins, and I put them in like a 4-foot wide bed thinking, oh yeah, that'll be more than enough room for them. And they just sort of laughed at me and went 8 feet in every direction. So make sure you have enough room for things. Make sure that the plants have enough room for good air circulation and enough room for the roots to grow as well. And it's important to like hang on to those plant tags, because they will tell you, or even the seed packets too. They're going to tell you, how much space things are going to need, and putting that in that garden journal is a good reminder for how things are going to grow as you're planting. So thinking about how to start a vegetable garden, there are lettuce and radishes are really easy to start as soon as you can work the soil. You can even plant them a little bit early, and as that soil warms up, they will pop up and start to germinate. Beans and summer squash, which are more of those warm season crops, late May, and then transplanting tomatoes and peppers in June. Thinking about easy veggies for new gardeners, things to start from seed would be things like beans, carrots, cucumbers, peas, radishes, squash, and zucchini. And keep in mind with carrots, they can take a long time to germinate. So, keep them moist as they're trying to germinate. Starting with plants, so transplanting actual plants, these are ones you would either start inside or get from a garden center. Things like eggplants, ground cherries, onions from sets or seedlings, peppers, tomatoes, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, tomatillos. And then there's a bunch that you can either start from seed or plants. So beets, cabbage, chard, kale, lettuce, kohlrabi, turnips, and rutabagas. So things that you're starting from seed outside is really direct sowing is what that means. And so that's basically to plant those seeds directly in their permanent space. And a lot of things really don't need to be planted very deeply. Usually it's like a 1/4 inch for most things that have tiny seeds, because you don't want to bury them too deeply. 2 times the size of the seeds is really as deep as you want to plant those. So keep that in mind. This is a really great plan for a veggie garden. This, you've got your pole beans, you've got some tomato plants, some basil plants, scallions, radishes and carrots, lettuce. Pole beans and tomatoes, they really need some support and something to grow on. So that can be done with tomato cages. It can be done with trellising mesh, cattle panels. Basically, you want something for those plants to grow up instead of sprawling out. As you harvest crops like scallions and carrots and radishes and lettuce, replant them with other quick growing crops, which all of those are. And I really, really love interplanting radishes and carrots together. So I dig one little furrow that's, maybe a 1/4 inch deep. I put the radish seed in it, I put the carrot seed in it, and then I pinch it closed and water it. And what happens is you have those radish seeds will pop up in like 3 or 4 days. They'll be up and there. The carrots, like I said, they take longer to germinate. So by the time the radishes are ready to harvest at about day 20, 25, your carrots will be just a couple inches tall, and you can harvest those radishes and leave lots of room for the carrots, and you'll have like twice as many, that space is twice as productive as if you had just planted radishes or just planted carrots. So that's a fun trick. Plants for food. This are veggies for shady spots. So here's an even more extensive list: arugula, beet greens, broccoli, chard, cucumbers, kale, lettuce. Especially during the hot months of July and August, they're going to grow great in shade, much better than in sun. Peas, radishes, scallions, spinach, and squash are all going to grow great in shady spots. And then there's also plants that you can grow multiple times per season for frequent harvest. So these are these quick growing crops that I was just talking about, that once your lettuce is done, plant some beets, or once your kohlrabi is done, plant some radishes, scallions, spinach, turnips. They're all kind of interchangeable that way. Easy to grow herbs. Herbs are really great and an important part of the garden. Not only do they help flavor what you're growing and what you're eating, but they are also provide really great habitat for pollinators and beneficial insects. All of these plants on this list, the basil, chives, cilantro, dill, chervil, summer savory, all of them, the whole list, are going to have these little tiny flowers that actually will attract good insects to your garden and help you suppress pests. So thinking about what you need to start with, important tools are things like a shovel or a spade, trowel, pruners, gloves, rain gauge, hose and watering can or watering wand. I also really like to have some drip irrigation if you have a bigger garden, and a timer where I can just set it up, and then when I want to water my garden in the morning, I can just set it for half an hour or 45 minutes or even an hour if it's been dry, and just walk away and not have to worry about turning it off. That's really important. My other favorite tool that's not listed here is a soil thermometer. I like that so I can keep track of the temperature of the soil, so that as soon as we hit that like 55 degrees, I can get out there and start planting those cool season crops. The pruners is really nice for deadheading, and that's something that you do to encourage more flowers. So you basically just cut off the flower blooms, and ideally you want to do it kind of right above where the leaves from that stem that the flower is coming off is attached. Mulch is another important term that we use a lot in gardening, and it's basically a ground cover material that is reducing the exposed soil. It's going to help minimize weeds. It's going to reduce erosion, moderates the soil temperature, and helps retain moisture. And you can use a bunch of different things for this. You can use straw, you can use hay, you can use burlap bags, cardboard. You want something that's aesthetically pleasing to you. If you're in a perennial situation, you could even use wood chips. I would use something more along lines of straw in a vegetable garden setting. It's just going to have a better balance to your soil. So it's really important to think about, nurturing your soil with what's on your property. So If you have leaves that you're raking in the fall, you could spread them on your garden beds as mulch. It's also important to think about food scraps or plant debris and lawn clippings that can be composted, and then that compost can be added back to your soil. Perennials, we've talked about those. These are the perennials that, the plants that come back every year. And once they're established, and these can be flowers, but they can also be trees and shrubs, and they're going to need a lot less fertilizer and water than annual plants, which just makes them more economical and environmentally sound. And in the class of perennials, you have natives as well. And these are plants that are specifically come from our geographic region for hundreds of years. And so they're going to be well suited to our climate, and they're going to support the native wildlife and require fewer resources to thrive. This is a really, important piece to think about. We have a list of a bunch of our favorite natives for shades, natives for sunny spots, and then natives for hummingbirds. So this is a great list. And these are all, the lists of all these plants are actually in our Dig In guide that you can download from our website. And I'll make sure that you get the list of all of these resources in the follow-up email. So pollinators, what are pollinators? They are the bees and butterflies and hummingbirds and other wildlife that transfer pollen. And so supporting those good insects is really important. It's actually really important to actually leave the foliage and the plants up into the early spring until the temperatures are at least around 50 degrees, because a lot of these good insects will actually overwinter in that foliage. And so it's important to keep that in mind when you're cleaning up your garden early in the spring. We also have a really great native pollinator garden design that's, for an 8 by 10 foot sunny spot. Natives can help support pollinators by providing those rich nectar sources and fruits and seeds as well. They are going to create habitat for nesting bees and egg-laying butterflies and overwintering insects. And they're also going to reduce the toxins by eliminating the need for pesticides, insecticides, herbicides, and non-organic fertilizers. A single garden bed can serve up food and habitat for birds and pollinators all year long. So make sure to fill a dry, sunny spot with flowering native plants and watch the wildlife flock. It's also important to think about putting the plants where they want to be. So the garden tags are going to be super helpful for this. Seed packets can also do the same thing. They're going to tell you important information about how big the plant's going to get, both height-wise and spread, the light, how much light it needs, if it's full sun or full shade or part way, what zone it grows in, when it's going to bloom, and even can offer other tips and tricks as you go. So trying to grow a plant that is in the shade can be really frustrating and expensive and ultimately not earth friendly. So check out the plant tags for all those, the light, the soil conditions, and remember the gardening mantra, right plant, right place. It's also important to plant in layers. So here you want to mix and mingle trees and shrubs, ground covers, annuals, vegetables, and perennials in layers. Like us, plants are healthier in communities, and those plant communities provide nesting ground and food for wildlife as well. It's also important to think about watering wisely. If you have water-hungry plants, group them together to minimize the water use. Rainwater is really great for plants, and so rain barrels can be a really good source of that water. So if you have a downspout that you could add one to and then collect the water from there to water your plants, it's like liquid gold. I did this a couple years ago and I love it. I just love being able to fill my watering can up with rainwater and water things as needed. Saving seeds is another great tip. Did you know that seeds will adapt to soil conditions where they are repeatedly grown? Radishes are a great example of this. So if you have radishes that don't produce nice roots the first time you grow them, and they bolt and they produce flowers and seed pods, collect those seed pods, and you can even plant them in the same season, right in the same spot or nearby, and they will actually thrive and produce like the best radishes you can grow. They adapt that quickly. So it's really important to think about saving seeds from plants that do well in your garden to grow the next year. Beans, marigolds, and sunflowers are the easiest seeds to save. And then let nature control those pests. So a garden that welcomes a diversity of insects, birds, and wildlife is less likely to be overrun by pests. And make sure to include flowers and herbs, especially those with small flowers in your garden, to host beneficial insects. Two of my favorites are dill and cilantro, and they flower pretty quickly, which can be frustrating if you're trying to grow them for their leaves, but just replant them and let those flowers bloom. You can always collect the seeds and use the seeds in your cooking. Dill kind of turns into the dillweed seeds, and the cilantro turns into coriander seeds. But the intermediate time when those flowers are blooming, they will attract all kinds of beneficial insects to your garden that will help control a lot of the pests. So don't let a lack of space stop you from planting. Many herbs and vegetables and flowers flourish in containers on windowsills, tiny balconies, and small stoops. More plant settlers are offering plants that are grown for these small spaces. And starting a container garden is really easy. Find a cute container, make sure it has drainage holes in the bottom, add your potting soil and a plant, and you're on your way. This is a great design for a window box garden that will have you, smelling and watching the beautiful things grow, and also being able to eat some yummy vegetables from it as well. This is another fun thing that I like about the Gardening for the Planet. Natives, we've talked about them a bunch. They're really important. Legumes are also really important because they can actually help fix nitrogen and build the organic matter in your soil, and I'll talk about that in just a second. Grasses can also be really important in terms of absorbing rain and preventing runoff and erosion. Those grasses can also host the grass stems, which is kind of crazy, can host a lot of those beneficial insects and butterflies as they overwinter, which is crazy and super fun and exciting to me. And then, just any plants that you plant are going to pull carbon dioxide out of the air and turn it into oxygen, which is super important for everyone. So to get those legumes to actually fix nitrogen, you need to know about this thing called inoculant. And this is kind of upper next level gardening for your gardening 101, but I think it's really important to know about for beans and peas and any kind of legume that you're going to grow. It's basically a black powder that you buy at a garden center. You mix it with water till it's kind of in the consistency of a runny yogurt, and then you dredge your seeds through that material, the inoculant mixture of water, the slurry, and then plant those seeds right away. And what happens is it provides the right rhizobacterium that will allow the roots to create a fungal relationship with the mycorrhizae that they need in the soil to fix more nitrogen and basically feed your soil. So it's important to leave those roots in the ground so they break down. And make sure that you add the tops back to your compost so that you're utilizing all of that nitrogen that they're pulling out of the air and into the plants as they're growing. So thinking about gardening, and start small. Try growing a patio-sized tomatoes or cucumbers in a container, or fill a small raised bed with herbs and lettuce. Look for a convenient location that's drenched in full sun and close to a deck or a path that you can easily weed and water and harvest. Putting a garden like at the far edge of your property that you're not going to go to unless you go to it is maybe not the best idea when you're getting started. Put it someplace where you're going to walk past it several times a day, even, just so that you can keep track of what's going on in there. Mix plenty of compost in with your soil to add nitrogen, which is what most plants require. A little bit of nitrogen, some require more than others. And you want to start with plants or seeds from your local garden center, things that are easy to pick, vegetables to grow, such as lettuce, cucumbers, beans, lettuce, and tomatoes. Feeding your garden. So in addition to adding compost, it's important to fertilize maybe once or twice a month with a liquid seaweed or fish emulsion fertilizer. It's kind of stinky, but man, it's magic for those plants. They just love it, and they will thrive. And then lastly, it's weed early and often. You know, weeds when they're tiny are way easier to control when they get really big. They can get overwhelming if you let them get too big. So make sure that you're pulling stuff out as it's popping up. So the dig in, the the first and second volumes of the MSH's dig in guides is where a lot of this information from this presentation is coming from. And we'll be sending a link to both in the follow-up email that you will get in a day or two. All the garden plans and great tips are in here. Plus there's a month-by-month to-do list to get you started and keep you going. In addition to that, there's also this really great resource hub that we have at northerngardener.org that has tons of great articles and links to everything you need to know to get started. There's a seasonal guide, there's garden solutions, there's info on different kinds of plants, growing food, community resources, and then blogs and books and podcasts as well. We also have the Great Northern Gardener magazine, and a lot of the articles on the resource hub are coming straight from there as well. Additionally, you'll find webinars and other resources as well. If you enjoyed this presentation, I'm doing 2 more classes coming up here in April. One is on garden planning and the other one is growing fruits and veggies, so check those out. And then if you are not a member, you should definitely check out the membership options. They are such a great deal. And we're starting a new campaign here in April that's the One New in 22, trying to get everyone to join or gift a new membership to someone else. So Lara, let's tackle those questions.
All right. Really great presentation, Courtney. Loved it. Lots of information. And we have questions. So
Great.
let's get going. My first question is, I loved what you said about the radishes. I didn't know that. And I have struggled with radishes. So you grow them, you harvest the seeds, and then you can use them the same season, or you?
Yeah, because they're
Wow.
fast. Like they'll produce those seeds within like a month and a half, probably of planting them. And so yeah, if they bolt, bolts is just a fancy term for making flowers and making seeds. But if they do that, yeah, they will. You can harvest those seed pods, and they actually make these radish pods, which you can also eat. They're kind of like spicy peas. But if you let them dry, then you can harvest those seed pods and pull the seeds out of them and plant them. And then they adapt to the microclimate super quickly. It's amazing.
Wow, that's cool.
Yeah.
Okay, we have a question from Jenny. You're gonna love this question, Courtney. Should you use mulch in a raised bed is the first part of the question. And then she is adding, I'm thinking about doing the square foot method.
Okay. So if you're using the square foot method, the caveat that I would have with that is make sure that you're using the kind of soil, the soil that they recommend with the amendments that they recommend, because in my experience, the square foot gardening can sometimes squeeze too many things in and be more taxing on your soil than if you just have average soil. So that's something to be, add a bunch of extra compost, make sure that you've really amended that soil well, or just give your plants a little bit extra room than the square foot gardening method recommends. Mulch on a raised bed, it's kind of up to you. I typically will use mulch on some things, but not on everything. I more subscribe to the theory of planting things close enough so that at maturity they're just barely touching and they're going to shade out the weeds, rather than doing a lot of heavy mulching in between things. But mulch is not a bad idea, even in a raised bed. It's going to help hold the moisture in and keep the weeds down as well. So yeah.
Okay, great. Let's see here. We have an inoculant question from Barbara. She was chasing a toddler, so she may have missed the answer here. But let's see here. But it's inoculant. Is inoculant something you need every year, or does your soil change after plants with it have been grown there?
That's a good question. So I think our climate is cold enough that unless you've had like a continuous supply of legumes growing in that spot year after year. So like clover, clover is a perennial, it's legume. And so if you have inoculated clover that you're putting in, the first year, it's probably gonna year to year to year hold on to that rhizobacterium and not necessarily need to be re-inoculated. But with veggies, a lot of times we're rotating our veggies around and not putting the peas and the beans in the same place every year. And so you're gonna be better off re-inoculating your those seeds, the new seeds that you're putting in with those annual legumes. So yes, I would recommend it's pretty cheap to do it, and you're gonna benefit from it.
Okay. And is it challenging to lay those seeds once they have the flurry or the yogurt substance on it?
No, because beans and peas are all large seeds, so it's really easy to just dredge them through there.
Nice. Okay. Another one of your favorite questions from Lisa. Can we use ground cover between rows instead of mulch?
Oh, that is one of my favorite questions. I am a huge fan of white Dutch clover for that particular application. White Dutch clover is a really, really great ground cover. You can, if you start out with bare soil, put down white Dutch clover seed as it's getting established, you can still walk on it and you're not going to hurt it. I've done this many, many times, so I can attest to this. It's going to grow up. You can mow it anytime the weeds get taller than it. You can walk on it after it's rained and you're not going to compact your soil. It has a profusion of beautiful little white flowers that are awesome for all those beneficial insects and pollinators. I could go on and on about white Dutch clover. I love it so much in that exact application. So I'm a huge fan of that. Yes,
Yep.
plant white
You
Dutch
taught me
in your pathways.
Yep, you taught me that many years ago, and I love my clover. Yeah, so Katrina is thanking you and was wondering if there are resources on Northern Gardener's site for layering different types of plants, or do you have any other recommendations?
If you're looking for layering edibles, the Edible Forest Garden books by Dave Jackie are really great. Otherwise, in terms of layering, I'm sure there are tons of articles about, combinations of different plants in the magazine, and I'm sure some of them are I will have to double check. I don't know off the top of my head, but yeah,
there's stuff added every day, so
yeah,
it's worth. I think the search function is working pretty well, isn't it, Courtney?
yes,
And
definitely.
yeah, yep. Let's see here. So what is that? northerngardener.org/resource hub? Pretty
Yes,
easy to find. Yep. Okay, and then your soil thermometer. Do you have a favorite thermometer?
I do. Okay, no, last time I tried to do this, I couldn't find it, but I think it's right here. So let me see. I like to keep it handy.
Love it. Is it different while you're looking for it? Is it different than your compost thermometer, or is it the same?
Yes, because your compost thermometer is usually that's really, really long. And the soil thermometer is only a couple inches long. Haha, I found it. Yay. This is my soil thermometer. It's maybe 5-6 inches long. It just has a little I don't know if you can really see, but it has a little thermometer-y, and you just stick that in the soil as deep as the little green knob and pull it back, let it sit for a couple minutes, pull it out, and you can tell what the temperature is. And it's about $10-12 at garden centers. I'm 100% sure that I got this at Eggplant Urban Farm Supply on Selby and Fairview in St. Paul, but I see them everywhere. You can get them at Menards, you can get them at Bachman's. All the garden centers should have them.
All right. I love shopping at Eggplant. They have some cool stuff. Yep. Okay, so about soil. Katrina has gone all in and has a 20 by 20 community garden plot. Awesome.
Nice.
Should she add seaweed or fish fertilizer prior to planting or sometime after they're planted? How should I get the soil ready?
So my favorite thing to do is to get Neptune's Harvest. That is the fish emulsion. I believe it's with the seaweed mixture. So it's the seaweed, kelp, Neptune's Harvest, fish emulsion. And I actually really, really love, as I'm planting, to water my plants in with that. So plant the plants, and then you mix the concoction of that up with water and dilute it, and then you water the plants in that first time with that. I find that you have a lot less transplant shock when you do that, and the plants are just really happy, and they will just perk right up and go.
Yeah.
With that. And then maybe repeat that, once or twice a month throughout the season, and you'll be good to go.
Yep. I like that stuff too. Have you, or do you use compost tea, or do you create your own compost tea?
I more use the fish emulsion.
Yeah.
I've had better luck with that than with compost tea.
I had a sewer line replaced, as you know, this past year or 2 years ago, and it went through a comfrey patch or one comfrey plant, which has broken up and become several comfrey plants throughout the yard. Have you used comfrey to create fertilizer? And has it worked?
I mostly just chop the leaves off and throw them in my compost pile. Is what I've done with those. I do love comfrey. I think comfrey gets a bad rap because unless you actively break up that root system, I haven't had mine like spread like crazy until you do that.
Yeah, I haven't had a problem, and I think I planted it in your class 10 years ago, until this happened.
Yep. And then you just share it. So dig up all those little, dig them up and share them, and
yeah, that's true. I should share them. I'm going to do that with my outdoor winter seed sowing stuff this year. So I should share those too. This is a fun question. Does MSHS have hands-on gardening opportunities? If so, what is the best way for people who need gardening 101? If not, where would you go?
Oh man.
Does that make sense? I don't know if I read that very well. Does that make
Yeah.
sense to you?
What do you think, Lara?
I don't know. I thought that we had something going on at Frogtown, but maybe not. That's more
Not
of
this year. No.
this year. Let's think about that. Joseph, let's think on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I don't know of any specific gardening volunteer opportunities that we are coordinating. I think that, getting involved with community gardens is a great option, or if you have an organization nearby that is working with gardening or youth, churches, church gardens can always use help, food shelf gardens. Maybe
that's a good idea.
Together a list of food shelf gardens for the resource hub. I will make a note of that and work on that and get that up there, because that would probably be a great way to do that.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thanks again, Courtney. This was a really great class, and thanks to everybody for attending. Yeah, anything else, Courtney?
No, thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Have a great night.
Thanks.